Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link and in association with ITESOFT. Today, we're looking at exploring RPA and artificial intelligence in accounts payable. My name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm delighted to be presenting as our main speaker today, Alan Brown. And Alan is Senior Sales Executive at ITESOFT, and he's been in this space for a good period of time, so very well placed to talk credibly about it. The agenda for today is I'm going to be touching on context, and then I'm going to be handing straight over to Alan. And Alan really is going to be talking about some statistics, some trends, case studies, etc. So lots of good information to be shared today. And he's also going to be talking about invoice automation, migrating AP into shared services. We are at a very interesting time within the world of purchase to pay and finance and accounting shared services generally. There's a lot of change going on. We're at this point of inflection. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of it is being driven by advanced automation technologies. And that's driving a lot of very positive conversations. It's making us really examine what our current processes look like, how we are leveraging existing technologies and existing enabling technologies perhaps that we've had in place for a while or that have been available for a while we haven't necessarily leveraged, and how we can then be using technologies like RPA, artificial intelligence, and even blockchain to be driving our shared services endeavors forward. So we are at an inflection point. That means we do have the early adopters, those people that are now maybe a number of years ahead of other people in their RPA programs, rolling out not just 70, 80 robots, but thousands of robots with the intention to scale up to 7, 8, 9,000 robots. And then those organizations who are proactively embedding artificial intelligence and machine learning within their processes to help them there. So we have these early adopters. We're looking to these early adopters to see what the results are like. And it still is relatively early days. RPA really has become a talking point in the last 3 to 5 years for a lot of shared services organizations. You kind of cast your mind back to 3 years ago, and the numbers, the percentage of companies that were deploying RPA within shared services were really single digit. Year on, it was about 25%. Year after that, it was about 40%. So we're seeing really solid growth. Shared Services Link anticipates that by the end of this calendar year, we'll be seeing about the high 50s in terms of percentage deploying, piloting, implementing RPA within their finance shared services organizations. But this does mean that we are still very much in the kind of the early days, and we are still very much as an industry, as a market, as a group of professionals trying to figure out the do's and the don'ts, and we're also just trying to separate the hype from the reality. So a lot of the conversations that we're having at Shared Services Link focuses on that. We're going to be zeroing in on these, I suppose, more new technologies that we're talking about here and how they apply to accounts payable. And then we're just going to be focusing on what a digital strategy looks like and how we can be using these technologies and enabling technologies to really help with your digital strategy within F&A. Right, now is a good time to introduce Alan. Over to you, please, Alan.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Susie. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. Very much appreciate the time that you are giving us. As Susie said, as part of the context of what we're going to be looking at, there are a number of different technologies out there that get bandied around, essentially all within the same meaning and context, like the robotics, RPA, artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics, things like that. And we're going to look at that in more detail, but the first thing that we're going to do before we get into that detail is looking at what are the priorities that CFOs are telling us, and this is via a report from PwC, that they're looking at rather than anything else, because this then helps drive some of the performance and some of the aspects that organizations will look to put in place. So coming back to the poll question, 42% of the attendees here are at a point where you are piloting or have gone live with some level of RPA in the last 12 months. That's actually pretty good in comparison to where we were last year, for instance, and is probably slightly higher than most organizations would expect. But I suspect it's also to do with the context within your organization of how that's being applied. But if we look at this PwC report in a little bit more detail, it's essentially split into 3 priorities, priority 1, 2, and 3 being the various different colours that are up there. And these are the top issues that came out from the research that was asked for them to be able to do in the organisation. And this is really quite interesting, especially when I refer back to what Susie was talking about in terms of how often do we really look at our internal processes and are they fit for purpose? Are they already more than fit for purpose, or actually have they been in place for a long time and they are either no longer fit for purpose or they just don't work, and therefore it's time to reassess how you're doing things. So, things like performance management is really interesting because this is starting to drive out areas around key performance indicators and the metrics and dashboards that people are looking to be able to understand how a business is operating across different departments. And you can only really do that with the ability to get to that data and being able to surface that in a more usable way than we currently have. Development strategy, for instance, what new capabilities does an organization need to have to either stay ahead of the competition or just to stay mid-tier or to not fall behind? This comes back to what Susie said about looking at our existing processes. It's not just about processes, but that's part of it. We have a very interesting one about optimization of processes, especially around purchase to pay, order to cash, this side of things, where 51% of the CFOs are looking to probably do something with that. 18% certainly are. Are we looking to do something? Are we researching it? Or are we really at an active stage where we're trying to put a project together and a business case behind it? But this is for the CFOs, especially where they are cross-platform, they have multiple different siloed databases in place, they've got multi-locations. How do we actually put standardization in place? How do we get visibility of what's happening with an invoice, for instance? Things like this. Cash management is always important, especially when it comes to cash flow and understanding liabilities. It comes back to other aspects like duty to report and so on. And then we have risk control. Well, it's not going to be a surprise that a board member is looking at risk and how to put some controls and governance around that and better policing. So this is part of where they're looking at, are we policing the organization correctly? Are we policing our suppliers better? Have we got the correct controls and appropriate controls that we need to be able to have in place? And when we bring this all back to the whole topic that we're looking at here of exploring RPA and artificial intelligence, well, do we need to start looking at the talent management aspect of how to reskill some of these people so they're no longer potentially doing data entry, for instance, and are doing much more value-added tasks that drive better communication, better information into the organization? And a lot of these tend to be quite interrelated rather than anything else. So what we're going to do now is look at what some of the technical levers are which will enable the board level members to be able to put some of these priorities into fruition for them rather than anything else. And what we'll see here, this is split into essentially 2 areas. We've got on the top half of the screen the digital levers that are being implemented, and then in the bottom half the projects that they are looking to be able to implement. It's interesting when I look at something like this and then relate it back to the poll question that we've just done, because most have started doing something within this sort of space. And, on the poll question where we had 42% that were piloting or going live, and we had 23% that were evaluating, well, this relates back to what we have here in a lot of ways. we've not really gone very far with being able to apply robotics and RPA into the organisation, but it will be into specific areas that we've done that. So if we look at the very first one that's there, digitalisation for purchase to pay, order to cash, and so on, it's up very slightly from what they were doing last year. And this is because we're finding that a lot of organisations, and the feedback from PwC is similar, that they're taking a phased implementation approach to how the technology is being put in place. So a little bit like Susie was saying with early adopters, they're putting a bit in place, seeing how it works. Can that be further adapted? Is it good enough? Or can we move on to the next piece? This then relates back to things like the collaboration aspects. Lots of companies have decided, that you'll know about collaboration from things like SharePoint. And lots of companies will have decided we need to do more of this and involve more people. But things like SharePoint, for instance, isn't necessarily the best way of working. Because when it then comes back to dashboards and being able to have KPIs in place, being able to have the metrics in place, having visibility, this is why there's a big step up on that aspect from 28% to 50% for last year. And that's going to have another big step up again for 2018. Interesting, when we then start looking down the tail of the levers that are being implemented, it's actually for 2016, only 2% of organisations were putting robotics in, and only 9% were putting it in for 2017. Is that because organisations aren't actually really putting robotics in, or is that because we don't really understand what robotics and RPA really is, and they may actually be putting things like that in place, but not really in a way and in an explicit process that they are really achieving the benefits from that? So the whole point of some of this is that digitalisation needs to happen because it allows much more capability to be put in place, especially around being able to get access to the data. So things like digitalisation of purchase to pay, the dashboards and KPIs and the analytics, that's all coming from having digitalisation in place. So now another poll question.
So coming up on your screen, we want to get an understanding as to what degree your organisation is using cloud-based technology. Does your organisation make use of cloud-based technology today? Yes, most of our technology is indeed cloud-based today, so probably over 50% of systems and technology that you're using is cloud-based. Yes, but we could go further. No, not at all. We're not making use of cloud-based technology today, or perhaps you don't know. Now let's have a look at the data coming back. 14% of you are very encouragingly saying that most of the technology that's used, certainly within your shared services organisation and your process, is cloud-based today. 75% of you say, yes, we are using it, but we have the opportunity and scope to go further. 6% of you saying no, and 6% of you are unsure. Back to you, please, Alan.
Lovely. Thanks for that, Susie. It's really interesting looking at that there is some cloud capability in place, and that's not necessarily a surprise, but it is also more revealing that 75% of you said that you could go further. It would be really interesting to get what you thought that further could be as part of leveraging that question a little bit more. Because what's interesting about that is on the previous technology lever slide, we were talking about 31% of the organisations have only got a level of cloud capability in place. And some of that could be things like organisations are doing this already on backup and storage. Some are Office 365, that type of stuff. So what we're going to look at now is essentially the Gartner maturity curve. This is something that hopefully most of the attendees will have heard about before. And this comes about where there tends to be latest technology, and Gartner have put it into a graph because they're very good at being able to do this sort of stuff. And on the left-hand side, we can see the visibility aspects of it. And that's really about the amount and time of hype and marketing and noise that is being made about it. So new or early technologies that are coming in start off as the technology trigger. We get lots of hype, which creates lots of noise and expectation about what that's going to deliver for organizations. And then what happens is it doesn't quite actually deliver what the organizations believed that they thought it was going to. And this is where we come down into the trough. And then as the product matures over time, which is the bottom axis, That's where the capability starts to get applied into the technology, usually at an application level or a departmental level, and it then builds out into producing the results that organizations are looking for. This is where, when we start applying some of the latest technologies that we're looking to explore today around robotics, for instance, where does that occur on this plateau of productivity and this maturity graph? So robotics, in its very, very simplest term, is, we can look at something like OCR, for instance, which has been around for many, many years. And that would be on the right-hand side of the screen for you. Cloud, that hasn't been around as much. It's probably only really been around properly since early 2000s, after we got through Y2K and broadband really kicked in properly to allow cloud capability in place before. Because before that, we had, if anyone can remember, dial-up, unbelievably. But now we've got things like artificial intelligence. We've got machine learning coming into it. And that's quite early on in the maturity curve in this example. But part of this is also about where is it aimed, what sort of organizations is it aimed at, and where do you sit on that as well. So for instance, you generally find that large corporates will be early adopters because they have time, the resources to be able to, put the money in and the time in and the expertise in to be able to have the gains that they get from that early on, but it tends to be very focused. So small to medium-sized organizations generally can't do that because they don't have that plethora of capability and resources that are in place. But large-scale, widespread global organizations also have the same issue as the SMEs from that point of view, because they may not be as joined up. They may not have a shared service center in place, for instance. And therefore, where does that all look to fit on the curve? And especially when you relate that back to where yourselves are. What we're going to do now is actually break down some of the technologies that we're going to go through, with the first one being cloud. Then we'll go through some of the individual ones for that. So cloud, why is it still being talked about so much? It's been around for a long time, and early cloud, when it came out a long time ago, was really aimed at small to medium-sized organizations, or it was aimed at organizations that were growing really quickly that didn't necessarily have the staff already in place, they didn't necessarily have the infrastructure in place at that stage, and therefore it was an easy option to essentially outsource it to someone else, because you are outsourcing your infrastructure to an external organization, whether it's Amazon Web Services or it's Microsoft Azure, and there are lots and lots of organizations out there that do that. The whole point is it's meant to give you flexibility, agility. It's meant to allow you to have more capability for the peaks and troughs that happen through the business cycle. It also means, depending on when new applications come out, that new technologies are easier to gain access to because of it's on the cloud. You don't have to put lots of infrastructure in place. And there's new financial pricing models that are in place as part of that. But the cloud has also opened up new areas around data, and especially big data started off, and I'll talk about this as well slightly later, but it started off probably about 10 years ago, all because of cloud and cloud computing types of capability. So let's get a little bit more into specifically robotics and the RPA side of things, and what is that and what's that about, because this is one of the new emerging technologies that are coming through. Essentially, just to be able to put a little bit of a definition in place for this, this is where it's meant to be plug-and-play software that generally tends to be context-specific. These are tools that are designed to mimic, in a lot of cases, the same manual or people-intensive paths that humans would use or staff would use within your organization. So this is done by mapping out what your process is for the software robot to be able to follow that via a number of different routes, computer pathways, data repositories, etc., and have essentially the robots replace the human beings. And there are lots of tools coming to market under this RPA type of banner. And most of the tools don't meet all the same criteria. So they have a similar functionality, but not a the same functionality, and it all, in some cases, comes down to how they're deployed. This is something that you really need to do your research on. It's something that you really need to be able to get a handle on of what is RPA, what is robotics, and some of the other ones that we'll be coming to as well. But part of this is about where do you focus it? So in a lot of cases, robotics has been focused on low-value, mundane tasks. An easy example within the invoice processing world, for instance, is data entry and all the associated issues with that. But to be able to do robotics, you fundamentally have to have, as a starting point, digitalization. You need to have an electronic image, an electronic version of that paper document. Some of the technologies that are out there that apply for robotics and robotic process automation are business process management suites, otherwise known as business process management capabilities. There's intelligent BPM, business rules engines, integration engines around APIs, whether it's HTML based, etc., etc. There are other organizations that are just talking about RPA, etc. They are all essentially similar but different. And some of the applications of how they can be used are down at the bottom. So how do you deal with email attachments? How do you deal with invoices coming into your organizations or sales orders coming into your organization? So robotics has moved forward massively in the last 3 to 5 years, but most of that tends to be context specific. So a very easy example of robotics, for instance, 20, 25 years ago, we used to have cars that we bought that would rust. Well, nowadays we do not have that, and that's all down to robotics in the manufacturing process. So robotics has been around for a long time. It's just understanding where and how it's been applied. So this takes us on to the next one that we're going to look at, which is around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And similar to robotics and robotic process automation, there are lots of different terms out there that organizations will use to be able to hype themselves up to say we're better than someone else. So artificial intelligence can also be known as neural networks. It can also be machine learning, deep learning. What's the difference here? So in the past, if you wanted to be able to describe something, and on the right-hand side of your screen there, you can see we've got a dark blue image of a car. What we used to do is have a person, used to be an IT person, a programmer, who would code up the characteristics of a car, and specifically of that car, and put the classifications in place to be able to then detail when the machine saw that, to be able to say, what is that? And it would either identify that as at least a car, or it's not. So it was very black and white from that point of view. Well, the artificial intelligence, machine learning aspects is about the machine being able to learn things and being able to document that for itself. Again, a simple example of that, coming back to the invoice processing side of things, is about, do you template your supplier invoices, or is the machine clever enough to be able to do that for you itself? The output of this, though, is that it creates a huge amount of data. And to be able to do this well with artificial intelligence, we need high volumes of examples to be put through the machine to be able to then get the information correct. Because the more it sees, the more it learns, and therefore it can discount the spurious details that have been entered into the system. Lots of data that it's going to create, well, that then takes us on to advanced analytics and big data. There are, again, many different types of data and big data or advanced analytics in terms of how it can be done and the way that it can be done and the use of that. This couldn't be done before we had the ability to do cloud computing. Certainly from Microsoft's point of view, you will have seen some of their adverts about cloud computing and how organizations couldn't find the antibiotics for helping people and organizations out in different countries without this cloud computing capability. It's because we've got much more ability to get to data. How do we then be able to drill into that data? How are we able to run our business from data about what's happening within the system? And part of that's about being able to allow predictive capability of what-if scenarios. If we're able to say, if we were to increase our volume by, or if part of our business was to fall sick, or if I had 2 members of staff that went off ill at the same time, what impact does this have? This gives a far higher level of access than you would have had previously. It allows you to drill in and down and across the data much more in real time, and to then be able to apply some of this back to things that we were talking about in the artificial intelligence around business rules, so that you can then plan for some risk assessment capability. What we're now going to look at is the last piece of technology that has had a huge amount of marketing hype around it, and bizarrely enough, not a lot is really known about it, which is blockchain. Most organizations, or most people rather, would probably know about it because of Bitcoin and other electronic currencies, cryptocurrencies as they're known, that have gone on and made huge amounts of money globally across the organization. And really, from our point of view, this is really about the traceability, the capability to be able to tamper, to alter, to change something that has blockchain capability wrapped around it. You just can't do it. So this then gives you a complete, robust, solid audit trail for documents that you may be looking to receive. And this is why it's used so heavily within the cryptocurrency marketplaces at this moment in time. It has got uses and is moving slowly out into other areas like food traceability. So, for instance, pharmaceutical organizations are starting to be able to use this as well, so they can understand the end-to-end supply chain when it comes to a recall of products, for instance. But let's bring this all back to how and what we're looking to try and do in the shared service center. The first thing that we're going to look at here is around the invoice automation aspects of that. For some of the organizations who've joined our webinar, they have a level of manual processing still in place. So we're going to look at why we're going to automate in the first place. There are a number of reasons for that. You can see the 6 key reasons that are up there for this. Number 1, it's about reducing cost. I don't know any organization that I've gone into, whether it's public sector or corporate, that is not looking to reduce the processing costs. Part of that processing cost is about headcount, but it usually means about taking headcount out of the finance team, and they may be using them elsewhere, but they're not on the P&L. But this reduction of processing cost could be about freeing up time for being able to do higher value tasks, being able to chase the business, getting them to actually clear invoices that are still out on dispute, for instance. Another topic is about team productivity. For a lot of companies, sometimes what they're looking to be able to do is to build capacity into the team so that they can actually keep the same number of team in place, but actually they're a growing business, and therefore they want to keep the same team size, but be able to do more. So another way of looking at this is, if you were, for instance, doing 9,000 or 10,000 invoices per full-time member of staff, how do you increase that? Because that 9 to 10,000 is about right for manual processing per year for each full-time equivalent. But could you do 60,000? How would you get your staff to be able to do 60,000 or 200,000? This is where the automation side of things really starts to kick in. The next one on payment deadlines. Most organizations are getting hit with this for duty to report. It's also about good PR aspects around how your organization is paying suppliers. The fourth one there is about compliance. It could be external compliance, but it's also about internal compliance. And how are you achieving that? How are you policing that? Because another aspect I come across a lot, finance and the AP team get blamed a lot, because all you guys have to do is pay an invoice. And why is it so difficult to be able to pay an invoice on time? So this also comes back to visibility within the process. Is it across the whole process that you've got visibility, or is it on a specific invoice when you're asked about it? How can you identify the bottlenecks, such as invoices that are pending validation and are out there waiting to be approved but haven't yet been approved? And finally, we've got the aspects to do with reducing errors, potential duplicate invoices on fraud aspects. These are all the good and big reasons why organizations are looking to be able to put in place for moving forward with automation. And if we look at one of the main benefits for this, and it's not the single one, but it's about cost. For manual organizations, this is now split into a variety of different sectors for you. I won't go through each one of them individually. But if you look at the right-hand side of the screen for all others, we've got essentially what is at this moment in time everyone else who's doing it either manually or partially manually and partially automated. And then you've got best in class, and best in class is in relation to peer organizations within their vertical market. And there's a significant difference, both in terms of overall cost, which is round about just in excess of $15 per invoice, to just under $3 per invoice. And you start scaling these numbers up by the invoice volume you've got and the number of people you've got, you'll see where this comes from. The next one is really interesting as well, especially when it comes to things like duty to report. 12 days to be able to process an invoice. That's quite substantial. Being able to take that down to 3.5 days for best in class makes a huge difference. And when you're manual, that can be substantially longer. If you're decentralized, that can also be substantially longer before it even gets to your payment system to get it on and authorized for payments. But these are all related to one another and part of the business case that you should be looking for to put in place when you're justifying why you're looking at putting some automation in place. So what we're going to look at now are the big building blocks for the invoice processing automation side of things. And this is really broken down now into a number of big building blocks. First one being on the left-hand side of your screen, capture. How do you get sent invoices? We'll look at this in a little bit more detail as well, but they're going to come through in lots of different formats, lots of different structures. You may get EDI coming in. You'll definitely get them emailed coming in. You may have a portal of some type in place. And of course, you've got paper, which we still don't seem to have got away from at this moment. And all of these need to be dealt with and put into one structured format that works for your organization to be able to deal with and work from. And then we're talking about, as part of the capture process, how do we do extraction? How do we do validation of that so you can achieve the no-touch, the straight-through processing? And that's going to be predominantly on the PO-based invoices or on some of the non-PO ones that you can build business rules around for automatic coding and sending out to the business for approval. Straight-through processing is really what we're trying to achieve here, and you need to be able to have, as part of exploring and researching your technologies and which one to choose, high confidence levels that you've got the one that's going to be able to achieve straight-through processing, because that means you've got visibility of it, but you're not actually having to touch stuff. We have workflow in the middle in the bright gold color. That's about being able to send out into the business your PO-based invoices that have got discrepancies, price, quantity, etc. discrepancies. And then we have your non-PO invoices that are going to come to your AP team for coding, sending them out via workflow for your business people to validate, and then from that to upload into your ERP, and that should be done automatically. They might go through another level of approval for some payment or treasury team to be able to prove for payment, but that's down to the specifics of how your business would look to automate that. Then we have the analytics. You can see this goes from the point that you capture it to the point that it is in your ERP and also potentially paid, so that you have within the finance team complete visibility of where it is, what's happening with it, and how you're going to be able to resolve any potential questions that you'll have from suppliers. Now that leads me nicely into Supplier Portal, which is on the bottom. You need to have, for true e-invoicing, a Supplier Portal capability as well as capture, because the definition of e-invoicing means they have to be able to put in through electronically by email as well as upload through a Supplier Portal. But this then also gives you the capability to allow self-service capability for your suppliers for things like supplier statements, which tends to be the bane of most organizations' life, or queries around, you made a payment of $200,000, which invoices does that cover? They should be able to see that type of information there as well. So there are the big building blocks. What we're now going to have a look at is what are your options with current solutions and what are some of the problems with that? Now, we actually have three potential areas there. We've got on-premise solutions, we've got packaged cloud solutions, and the third option is BPOs. I don't have that down there, but it's not what we're into, so we're not looking at that one today. The problems with on-premise solutions are that it has a huge amount of infrastructure requirements needed for that. It requires heavy integration aspects to it, a lot of technical resources, and that's both on the business side as well as on your IT side to be able to put that in place. They also then need to monitor both the infrastructure as well as the application themselves to be able to optimize the automation rates on that and then go back through that on a regular basis to get really, really good reading rates, which then increases your automation rates. And the automation rate's extremely dependent on a number of things, like, for instance, the master data vendor repository and how good is that. So a simple question for yourselves at the moment is, when was the last time you went and refreshed your vendor supplier data? Do you have a team in place that over time, every month, every 8 weeks, goes back and updates it and checks the validity of it? Do you have duplicates in there? Is there missing or incorrect information in there? For most organizations, what we come across and with research that's been done, it doesn't seem as if you really get a reading rate and automation rate that's anything like 50%. But if you're able to go from a reading rate of 50% to 85%, the impact of that is you get 3 times the number of invoices through electronically as part of your straight-through processing capability. So it's really worthwhile looking at that aspect. And this is why it's essential to mobilize technical resources for these on-premise solutions to optimize the engines and clean the repositories, etc. We'll come on to that. But they are expensive to put in place and take a lot of time and effort then ongoing to put in place. And then you've got the cloud-based solutions. Now, they generally have come out, probably, certainly we brought our cloud-based solution out about, we started designing it 10 years ago, came out with it in 2010. And it was taking a lot of the capability that was in place for the on-premise solutions, but they were packaging it up and going, here it is, take it. So it generally then meant that a lot of the capability that you could get with an on-premise solution and that configurability and the flexibility, that went out the window because it generally tended to be very simple, very easy with what you could do with it. The reading rates on them generally tended to be fairly low, but it was aimed at small, low-end organizations where the complexity wasn't there, the sophistication isn't in the organization, therefore it didn't need as much as large corporates were looking for. This is really where it then comes to, what's next? And how does things like RPA and AI help and these new technologies help? So, what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand it back to Susie.
So coming up on your screen now is another poll question. We want to find out about the last time you upgraded your finance system. So was it when you implemented? Was it less than 12 months ago, so in the last 12 months, or was it more than 12 months ago? Okay, let's have a look at the results. 4% of you saying when implemented, and then just under 50% saying less than 12 months ago, 50% saying more than 12 months ago. So back to you, please, Alan, for some comment on that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And really where we were coming from with that type of poll question is that there are lots of organizations out there that once they've got a product in place, they tend to take a mentality of, it isn't broken, so therefore why change it? And this also relates back to some of the new technologies that are coming through about, how do you continue to get better and more benefits, especially when you're looking at a shared service center, if you're not actually changing some of the infrastructure in place? Some of the interesting feedback that we had is that a lot of companies out there, in fact, most companies out there, The report came back saying that in excess of 65% of companies were 3 or 4 versions behind on their on-premise solution. And we're also finding that vendors, and I include ourselves in this, are very heavily pushing the cloud-based solutions, because usually as part of these cloud-based solutions, they will include upgrades as part of that. And this is, coming on to the slide that we're now on, part of the reason why ITESOFT brought out the new disruptive technology called STREAMLINE for Invoices, which was looking to take the issues that we've just talked about and the limitations around current solutions of either on-premise or a limited capability for clouds and bring this product to market. Because the company realized that most, especially large corporates, they want to have the flexibility and the agility that an on-premise solution gives, but with the flexibility, especially around infrastructure aspects and the upgradability that you get with clouds. So STREAMLINE for Invoices integrates highly customizable and hugely extensible and generic processes that are encompassing essentially 2 areas. One is around the capture and extraction side, and the next is around the process elements of that. And that's really what we're going to be looking at next. So what we're going to look at now is specifically around some of the historical formats of invoices that are coming into the organization. So if we go back to 2000s, most of the invoices that were coming in at that stage were very highly structured EDI type documents. This is outside of paper, by the way. And then we look at, as we move forward, and hopefully yourselves will resonate with this, you've found a huge increase in the number of invoices that are coming in through a variety of different image types. So PDF, it could even be as simple as Word, Excel, etc. So this was a report that was put together from Bilantis, looking at the type of structure that's happening. And part of this is because it's changing, it's going to be changing again, because there's this hybrid model that's coming in around organizations looking to achieve not just 100% email, but other types that are achieving the push that they're asking for. And this all then relates back to things like the extraction performance that we're looking at. And really what we're looking at here is, for a lot of organizations, they've started down in the bottom left-hand side of this quadrant. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is about how do you extract data. And on the bottom axis of the screen, we're talking about how easy is this to be able to achieve. So when you're doing this manually, it's not that easy. It takes a lot of time and effort to be able to do. Most organizations went down the route of, we will put an on-premise solution in place. It's allowed them much easier ability to be able to extract data out. And then we will be able to move further forward. But we've come out with CAS, and this is taking it to the next step and next evolution of capability. So this is real robotics and RPA in place here. This is about black box. We do all of this. It's completely cloud capability. We as a company look to monitor this and define and set up all the rules, and we monitor on a regular basis so that if it falls below a certain level, we normally work on 85% automation rates. We will start to increase this. But how does this actually help in the shared service center? And what's interesting about this aspect of it is, for shared service centers, most organizations are not actually looking to reduce headcount. This is about standardization. This is about how do we improve a broken process. This is about where do we actually gain the benefits for how we move forward into the next aspects of services that we're looking to be able to achieve. And this resonates back to our future 2018 CFO slides of putting automation and streamlining processes within the organization, adding new services and customers within the shared service, which means you don't want to be putting more staff in place, but you want them to be doing better value, higher added tasks. How do you actually then design your processes to be able to achieve this capability? There's 4 key areas that we'll just briefly touch on. What are the good practice? So what is that for yourself? Are you actually looking at your current processes and identifying, are they fit for purpose? Have you mapped out a to-be process where you would like to be and identifying some of the bottlenecks, being able to identify where you can put common practices in place? If you've got, well, you will have an ERP in place, but you might have multiple ERPs. Can they support the new processes that you're looking to be able to put in place? So just to wrap that up for you and summarize why STREAMLINE is great for the shared service center, it's an enterprise capability. It's come from an on-premise capability. We've got the best data extraction rates in the market. We deal with that ourselves. You have no input or effort required to that. It gives you the flexibility that you're looking for because of the underlying capability around the process workflows. We support multiple ERPs. We don't care which one it is, from SAP to Oracle to Dynamics and all the other ones that are out there. And we embed the data analytics aspect side of things into the system as part of the underlying capability. What I'm going to do now is just finish off on one of our clients that has put this type of capability in place. The client is called Poly1. This is a global organization. They've taken a stepped approach to how they are looking to implement this. They're dealing with now in excess of 90,000 invoices a year with SAP. They have Ariba in place for doing most of the purchasing. And a lot of the issues that they had is it was all decentralized, multi-location, multi-currencies, all these sort of things were in place. Really what they were looking to do was to have a lot more intelligence around the system that they were looking for. So what did they actually get from that? Well, part of what they did is to look to centralize their system into one place. So they put a shared service center in place. They still have some localized capability because of country-specific aspects like invoices not leaving Italy, for instance, and they also need to be able to resolve invoices locally. So they have allowed in-country capability for invoice resolution. But what they've also been able to achieve from that is they put a single instance of SAP in place, and they run that all globally out of the US for themselves. They've got web-based capability globally out into the organization. They have reduced part of what they've done so that when they move to a new country, they then are able to upload the whole system for that new country in 1 week. So, Susie, back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.